Hi everyone, here's the Bookchemist once again, and today I'm reviewing In the Dutch Mountains by Cees Nooteboom, a writer I discovered very recently but which I completely fell in love with, and as I mentioned in my review of the following story, a masterpiece, he is a must-read for everyone who's a fan of self-involved, reflective, postmodern literature, experimental but rewarding literature, great books in the first place. In the Dutch Mountains is in many ways similar to the following story in that it is very short, it's dreamy, it's self-reflective, it's dotted with philosophical reflections and with reflections on Europe and on the differences between different parts and different cultures of Europe, but at the same time it's also quite different. Much more than the following story, this is a book, it's a self-reflective book on the act of writing, and especially writing fairy tales as opposed to novels, and on the values of fairy tales and popular storytelling of the sort, on the value of, magic and superstition, those kinds of things in fiction. In the Dutch Mountains will inevitably call to mind If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, because it features a great, fascinating, interesting and thrilling plot which is constantly interrupted by a narrator, by not really a framing device, but by an external voice, the guy who is currently writing the story in the Dutch Mountains. But much more than If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, In the Dutch Mountains isn't at all annoying when this happens, because the framing story, the story of this writer, is as interesting and his reflections are as interesting as the stuff you read in the story within the book, which is basically the story of these two circus performers who have to go to this mysterious, non-existent region of Europe, which is dark and is backwards and is terribly scary. In the Dutch Mountains feels a little bit like a crossover between a postmodern novel such as If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, with its disruption of, the narrative flow, and a novel such as S by Doug Dorst and J.J. Abrams, where you get the story, actually a novel, an actual story, and then you get another story in the margins of the book. If you don't know about that book, it's a masterpiece. If you ask me, go check it out, it's really great fun. In the Dutch Mountains is the same kind of story, but of course it's much more canonical storytelling and does that in a much more elegant way. If anything, if the book has one weakness, and I do think it has a small weakness, is that the story of the guy writing the fairy tale at the heart of the book is much more interesting than the fairy tale itself. Especially in the second half of the book, I kinda lost all interest in that fairy tale. But that's fine, because, the story of the writer and his reflections are amazing and very rewarding. There are secrets to be discovered in this book, there are a few great plot twists, and overall, if you're a fan of this kind of experimental, quirky, inventive literature about literature itself, if you're a fan of stuff such as Eco, Calvino, Borges, Kafka and such, this is the author for you, and In the Dutch Mountains is the book for you. I think it is in many ways an easier book than the following story by Nooteboom, because its reflections are easier to follow, but at the same time I think it's a bit less rewarding. So if you're on the fence about reading him, do begin with the following story, I think. I think it's a better novel. But again, In the Dutch Mountains is a great novel too. Let me know what you think about these books. And if you've read Nooteboom, let me know what I should read next by this great Dutch guy. Thank you so much for watching once again, guys. I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.